So Arlene Foster says, Ireland has never had a hard border. So I must be mistaken. You know, when I was a kid and my granny would take us up Christmas shopping in Newry, and we had to pass by all those British soldiers with machine guns and all that barbed wire. According to Arlene Foster, that's not a hard border. And then those idiots, Shane Ross and Simon Coveney, were overheard having a conversation about Brexit. Shane Ross was worried he'd said something wrong and that the press might pick up on the fact they were preparing for a hard border. But Coveney replied, "We don't want to go talking about stuff like that because we don't want to become known as the government who reintroduced a hard border on the island of Ireland. Neither the Tories nor the EU give a damn about the people of Ireland. And Leo Varadkar and co in the Dáil haven't got the guts to stand up to them. If the fight between the EU and the Tories imposes a hard border on Ireland, we should get tens of thousands of people to go and take it down." People in the border counties must be really nervous now. After years of being able to just go back and forth and go about your work, now suddenly there's going to be border checkpoints and border posts. And the problem is the DUP are propping up Theresa May at the moment, keeping her in power while she hangs on by the skin of her teeth. The DUP must be delighted with this whole fiasco. Any strengthening of petition plays to their bigoted reactionary politics. But how did the Tory party, representatives of British capitalism, the once world power, end up in this mess? You see, the Tories weren't always anti-EU. I mean, Margaret Thatcher was happy to help the EU draw up its neoliberal template, but British economic might has been declining over decades, and the City of London and all the corporations based there are dependent on EU markets. So it's in the interest of the City of London to stay close to the EU. But you see, after the 2008 banking crisis and the bailouts that came with it, most of the mainstream parties could no longer claim to represent working class people when they were kicking us in the face with austerity. And so the vote of all the mainstream parties in most countries in Europe declined. Sensing this, the Tory party panicked and tried to out racist UKIP. This meant that the economic interests of the British ruling class and the political interests of the Tory party separated. And so, to try and win over the right-wing base of their party, the Tories proposed the Brexit referendum, that somehow all the economic problems of the contemporary world would be solved by sloganeering about making Britain great again. But studies of the vote and the reasons working class people voted were very different to the reasons the Little Englanders in UKIP and the Tories voted. In a lot of northern towns that had been deindustrialised, places that are Labour heartlands, people voted to leave. By no means reactionary voters. They wanted to give two fingers up to the political elite in Westminster and the political elite in Brussels. Obviously, the vote has now been exploited by the Tories. But the ruling class, as long as they are the ruling class and as long as these parties are in power, will exploit any crisis to try and make working class people suffer. I mean, the other side in this debate, the EU, are just as nasty as the Tories. I mean, every party at the moment in Ireland seems to be pro-EU. Even Sinn Féin, who spent decades telling people to vote against EU treaties, are now cheerleading for the EU. But the EU is just as much an anti-working class project and is just as anti-working class as the Tories are in Westminster. In 1949, just after World War II, the US set up NATO, and feeling a bit confident from this, France and Germany decided to put aside their old rivalry and to unite. In 1951, they signed a Coal and Steel Pact, which 6 years later formed the basis of forming the EEC. The Germans, from the start, saw the EU as a way to legitimise their return to global power. But the EU has been about the ambitions of those major powers, France and Germany, ever since. I mean, the bank bailout shows this. Irish banks like Anglo-Irish Bank owed about 138 billion to German banks. And what did the EU do? Made sure that the Irish working class paid the cost of paying back those German banks. The Anglo bankers and the Irish developers got off scot-free, and the German bankers got paid back. And we suffered the loss of hospitals, schools, the crumbling of our infrastructure, lowering of wages, high rents, homelessness, the housing crisis, all imposed by the European Central Bank and the EU. The major powers that run the EU have always wanted to be a new empire. But the PESCO deal, which is about more EU military alignment, is about the EU trying to strut its stuff on the world stage and become not only a political player, an economic player, but a military player on the world stage. The fight between the EU and the Tories is a fight between two nasty mafia gangs. But unfortunately, it's the people of Ireland who lose out in that fight. And will Leo Varadkar stand up for the interests of the working class of Ireland, North and South? No, he will not. One, because he's so subordinate to the EU. When they say jump, he says, how high, masters? And two, because the Irish elite are terrified that a mass movement to challenge a hard border would also then spill over into a mass movement north and south for housing, for healthcare, for all the things that working class people need. We have to make Leo Varadkar and Arlene Foster's and Theresa May's worst nightmares come true. We have to build a mass protest movement. Tens of thousands of people marching north and south to go dismantle border posts if they try and impose them. Mobilising working class people, small farmers, all the people north and south who have an interest in opposing a hard border should unite in mass civil disobedience. But then such a mass movement and such protest movements have to start asking themselves about what kind of Ireland do we want if we remove the border but we still live in a tax haven north and south where thousands of children are homeless, where hospitals north and south are underfunded and crumbling. That's not a united Ireland worth living in. The battle against the border, the battle against Tory Brexit has to also be a battle for a socialist Ireland where working class people come first.